The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, a non-canonical text dating to the 2nd century AD, offers a provocative glimpse into the childhood of Jesus, a period notably absent from the canonical Gospels. Attributed pseudonymously to Thomas the Israelite, this apocryphal Gospel is part of a broader tradition of early Christian writings that sought to fill the narrative gaps left by the New Testament. Unlike the serene, all-knowing Christ of later orthodoxy, the child Jesus in this Gospel, while still depicted as divine, is also shown to be dangerously capricious, wielding miraculous powers with unsettling ease, and at times, vindictiveness. The text raises some interesting ideas, blasphemous ideas for sure if you ask modern readers, but also those which show how early Christian communities understood the nature of Jesus in his formative years. Today we'll be examining this very text and seeing just how precocious, mean and violent this young infant Jesus could be, according to these early descriptions. The first chapter begins with the author, Thomas the Israelite, introducing himself and telling us that he thought it was necessary to make it known to everyone of what transpired during Jesus' infancy, which kind of suggests that even back then, the childhood of Jesus was something of an enigma. Thomas the Israelite emphasizes that it is only by learning the childhood of Jesus that one can truly know who Jesus was, and with that, it gives the impression that there were events and aspects of his early life that were imperative to a greater understanding of Christ. Indeed, as we'll soon see, not everything we will read necessarily aligns with the Christ of the New Testament, and whether you consider it blasphemous or not, Thomas the Israelite deemed it essential reading. In chapter 2, we are introduced to 5-year-old Jesus, and here we are told that after it rained one day, he was playing at the ford of a flowing stream and stirring up the dirty waters. Then he gathered them into pools, and by word alone, he made them clean and excellent. This effectively becomes the very first miracle of Jesus, which, as we can see, isn't done to help anyone of any ailment or convince anyone of his powers, but comes from a more innocent, childlike curiosity. In a way, you might say it is no different from a regular child interacting with the world and discovering for the first time the limits of his abilities. From there, he takes soft clay from the mud and forms from it 12 sparrows. This, you might say, was the second miracle. Again, not performed for any significant purpose, but merely the whimsy of a young child playing. However, we are told that when he did these things, it was on the day of the Sabbath, and a certain Jewish man had seen Jesus doing these things. It's likely that he didn't really see what it was that Jesus had done, but had merely assumed the boy was up to no good. So instead of being in complete awe of seeing a 5-year-old demonstrate such remarkable fashionings, he instead went to his father Joseph and slandered Jesus, saying, "He made clay on the Sabbath, which isn't permissible, and formed 12 sparrows." When Joseph hears of what Jesus has done, he too isn't that impressed, and actually proceeds to rebuke Jesus, saying, "Why are you doing these things on the Sabbath?" Now, Jesus doesn't respond with humility and deference, as you might expect a 5-year-old to do after being scolded. In fact, he doesn't really respond at all. Instead, he pretty much ignores Joseph and proceeds to clap his hands, ordering the birds with a shout, saying, "Go, take flight like living beings." And the sparrows took flight and went squawking away. Having seen this, Joseph and the Jewish man are now amazed and begin reporting what they had seen to everyone. By chapter 3, despite the rumours of how Jesus had brought the clay birds to life, the son of Annas, the high priest, continues to lecture Jesus about his antics on the Sabbath, saying unto Jesus, "Why are you doing such a thing on the Sabbath?" And having taken a willow twig, he destroyed the pools and drained the water which Jesus had gathered. As we can see, there were probably those, like this son of Annas, who weren't convinced of Jesus' abilities, and probably just assumed it was some trick that the boy had done to get out of trouble. I mean, would you believe a 5-year-old had given life to 12 clay sparrows? Now, having seen this son of Annas destroy his pools, Jesus becomes irate. He responds in a way you'd expect any child might respond to seeing their toys destroyed. With anger, Jesus curses the man, telling him, "Your fruit will have no root, and your shoot will be withered, like a scorched branch in a violent wind." The curse sounds ominous as it is, but it's actually even much worse than that. "Your shoot will be withered," Jesus tells the man, and by this he means the man's child will wither. By the end of the chapter, the text tells us that that very child does indeed wither away and die as soon as the words leave Jesus' mouth. So by chapter 3 of this ancient gospel, Jesus kills a man's child because he is mean to him. Yikes. Once more, traditional readers will dismiss this as a fantasy, but others might see how such an event might have transpired considering the circumstances. There's a possibility here that the infant Jesus probably has no real understanding of the powers he has, much less how powerful he is in comparison to everyone else. This is the same for the average 5-year-old, who, having not learned to manage and control his emotions, may lash out in anger. Of course, when a child lashes out in anger, the fallout is usually pretty manageable. I mean, what's a 5-year-old really going to do? Knock over the Lego blocks? This is what makes the Infancy Gospel of Thomas so scary though, because 5-year-old Jesus can and does do way more than just knock over Lego bricks. He kills people who gets on his nerves, and worse, he proves to be vindictive, taking his anger and rage out not on the person who ruined his fun, but on the child of the offender. In chapter 4, we see another event where another boy is running and seemingly, accidentally, barges into Jesus. We can only assume that this child doesn't apologize, but nonetheless, before he can even get out of sight, Jesus said to him, "Cursed be you because of your leader." And just like that, the boy falls over and dies. I suppose from accounts like this, you can see why it never made it into the Bible. Jesus sounds less like the benign and peaceful character that many have come to admire, and more like Chucky on a bad day. Again, it might be said that this is a hyperbole, a dramatic effect by the author to frame Jesus as more impulsive, more brash, more quick to anger, just like any 5-year-old might be. The only difference is that most 5-year-olds probably don't wish people were dead, or will their children to die. So yes, Jesus definitely is shown to be a far cry from the man he becomes, but he's also a far cry from the average 5-year-old too. To be honest, from this depiction, he's scarier than most of the adult characters in the Bible. Now, when people see Jesus kill this boy, yes, they actually put 2 and 2 together and realize it's Jesus who's miraculously snuffed this boy, they cry out aloud, "From where was this child born, that his word becomes deed?" When the parents of the deceased become aware of what's happened, they blame Joseph, telling him that, "From wherever you have this child, you can't live with us in this village. If you want to be here, teach him to bless and not to curse, because our child has been taken away from us." It's interesting that despite being the Son of God, he is not necessarily born with an innate kindness. In fact, quite the opposite. I'm surprised he didn't go ahead and off the other villagers who were complaining about him at this point. But then again, perhaps their words had some impact on him. Jesus isn't seen to show remorse for having murdered yet again, but at least he hasn't taken the law into his own hands again. At least he is shown to stop and listen to his father, who tells him, "Why do you say such things, and they suffer and hate us?" It's about as close as Joseph gets to scolding Jesus. To be honest, if I was him, I'd probably have my reserves about scolding him too. Yet in any case, Jesus responds pretty calmly, if not somewhat sardonically. "Since you know wise words, you're not ignorant of where they came from. They were spoken about a 5-year-old, and they won't be raised, and they will receive their punishment." I mean, he's undeniably precocious in the way that he speaks. He pretty much just sounds like an adult, which only adds to the menace of him. But wait, what's all this about the villagers receiving punishment? Here, Jesus seems to imply that they were wrong for accusing him, a 5-year-old, of murder, even though that's literally what happened. If anything, he seems annoyed that he's been identified as the perpetrator so quickly, and so instead of conceding and accepting a punishment of his own, he decides to turn it back on them. But at least he doesn't kill them. He just makes them all go blind. Somehow, Joseph works up the courage to reprimand Jesus by actually pulling his ears hard. To this, Jesus complains that Joseph ought to be on his side. He is technically his son after all, and so instead of having a go at him for getting vengeance on those who have irked him, he should instead be praising him. By chapter 6, a teacher named Zacchaeus was standing there watching it all unfold, and we are told that he was very amazed by Jesus. He said to Joseph, "Come, give him to me, so that he may be taught letters, and so that he may know all knowledge, and learn to love those his own age, and honor old age, and respect elders, so that he may acquire a yearning for children, teaching them in return." This Zacchaeus obviously believes that Jesus' powers can be channeled, and that if he is able to benefit from education, he would naturally use his powers more for good than for wicked. To this though, Joseph is not convinced. In fact, he actually warns Zacchaeus, "And who can control this child and teach him? Don't think of him as a small person, brother." But Zacchaeus is not moved by this and insists that Joseph hands Jesus over to him. Now Jesus turns the precocious dial all the way up to 11, and he starts lecturing both Zacchaeus and Joseph, saying first to the teacher, "Being a teacher comes naturally to you, but you're a stranger to the name with which you've been named, because I'm outside of you, and I'm within you, on account of the nobility of my birth in the flesh. But you, a lawyer, don't know the law." Now you might say that Jesus is kind of correct. He certainly seems to suddenly know of his divinity, and is more than aware all of a sudden of how powerful he is. Yet it does not come without that youthful, bratty arrogance. I mean, we'd think this about any child who tried to lecture a full-grown adult. As if that wasn't bad enough, Jesus then turns to his father and tells him, "When you were born, I existed standing beside you, so that as a father, you may be taught a teaching by me, which no one else knows or can teach, and you will bear the name of salvation." Once more, Jesus is technically correct here. He, as the Son of God, would indeed offer teachings that no one else could. He has come to save Joseph and many others. It's just hard to digest such words when they're coming from a child who we've already seen do some pretty horrible things. Now, the Jews are pretty stunned by the way Jesus is talking and can't believe a 5-year-old even has this kind of vocabulary. To this, Jesus turns to them and asks them why they're so amazed. He's existed before the world was even made, and he knows all of their names and when they were born. Of course he's going to be able to speak as if he knows more than them, because he does know more than them. The people are speechless at this point and are no longer able to speak to him, possibly from fear of saying the wrong thing and being struck blind or worse. As if to lean into that fear with a morbid uncanniness, Jesus begins skipping around them, telling them that, "I was playing with you because I know you're small-minded and amazed with small things." See, now he's just downright insulting them. It also speaks to just how much power he actually wields. If turning clay pigeons into life was a small thing, or cursing people with blindness wasn't even that big of a deal for him. It does beg the question, what is the limit of his power? To which most believers will conclude that there isn't any. His powers go beyond what is even fathomable to us. For whatever reason, the text tells us that the people were comforted by this. To me, it seems like Jesus is being pretty condescending and low-key threatening. But yeah, the people are apparently comforted by him. With that, Zacchaeus takes Jesus into the school and begins trying to teach him the alphabet. You know, that thing that Jesus could probably master in like a second if he wanted? Jesus proves to be pretty disinterested in learning. He doesn't really much care what Zacchaeus has to say, When the man demands an answer from him, Jesus just begins ignoring him. To that end, Zacchaeus becomes so irritated with Jesus that he strikes him on the head. Now, I thought Zacchaeus was about to burst into a million bloody pieces for doing such a thing, but turns out Jesus doesn't actually physically harm him. He just obliterates his ego. He tells Zacchaeus that his words are like a noisy gong, and that all those letters he's trying to teach him, he already knows. In fact, he knows them more accurately than Zacchaeus ever could. The text tells us, when Jesus' anger ceased, he said all the letters by himself, from the Alpha to the Omega, very skillfully. And looking straight at the teacher, he said, "If you don't know the nature of Alpha, how can you teach another Beta? Hypocrites, if you know, first teach me the Alpha, and then I will trust you to speak of the Beta." Then he began to teach the teacher about the first element, and Zacchaeus couldn't say anything to him. In chapter 7, we see Zacchaeus utterly and totally humbled. He laments publicly that where he thought to gain a disciple, he actually ended up gaining a teacher, a 5-year-old teacher, no less. He concedes that he is baffled and miserable, and that he has brought shame upon himself for having tried to take on this child. He pretty much begs Joseph to take Jesus away from his school and to leave him be, saying that he now no longer understands anything because he doesn't understand the beginning or the end. And just like that, Jesus gets out of having to go to school, on the account that he already knows everything and is infinitely smarter than his teachers. I mean, he even decimates Zacchaeus' psyche to the point that he'll probably never teach again, and probably go out of business. In chapter 8, we see Jesus laughing at all that's unfolded before him. He tells everyone that, "Now may the barren bear fruit, the blind see, and the foolish in heart find understanding, that I'm here from above, so that I may deliver those below and call them up, just as the one who sent me to you has ordered me." With that, all those who were made blind had their sight restored, and all those who were killed were risen from the grave. And no one dared provoke Jesus, the child, thereafter. So in a way, there is a glimpse of the Jesus that the readers of the New Testament would be more familiar with. Jesus shows mercy here, albeit certainly goes a roundabout way of delivering it, whilst also teaching firsthand the magnitude of his powers. I suppose you might say that the only way they would have believed him, a child, is if he showed them some pretty extreme and irrefutable evidence of what he could do and how knowledgeable he was. But I can't help but feel like there was surely a more peaceful way to have achieved that. In any case, Jesus' methods here are undeniably effective, because after he's restored everyone he's afflicted, we are told that no one messes with him again. In chapter 9, Jesus is seen to be playing with other children on a certain rooftop of an upstairs room. However, when they are playing, one of the children, named Zeno, falls off from the roof and dies. When Zeno's parents hear about this, they immediately accuse Jesus of having killed him, which, to be fair, given his track record, is an understandable assumption. However, Jesus defends himself, exclaiming his innocence that no, he did not push him and he did not do anything towards the boy. Zeno's parents, though, are unconvinced, and when they were raging and shouting at Jesus, Jesus came down from the roof and stood beside the boy's body and commanded it awake, saying, "Zeno, Zeno, rise and say whether I pushed you or not." And miraculously, Zeno rose and he said, "No, he didn't push me." The gut-wrenching thing about this passage is that after Zeno is risen, his parents are obviously amazed and grateful that their son has somehow come back to life. Yet in the moments upon his waking, Jesus says to him, "Fall asleep." And we are left to believe that Jesus actually only resurrected him to prove his innocence, and that once he had done that, he pretty much just sent him back to death. You can only imagine the horror of Zeno's parents, to have lost their child, only to find them again, and then to lose them all the same. You might describe Jesus here as being cruel, but there might actually be a reason for this blunt and cold gesture. It's because Zeno's life had come to a natural end. there was nothing Jesus could actually do to restore him to life, because his life had already fulfilled its purpose. He was now in a better place anyway, and to deny him of paradise in favour of easing his parents' grief may have perhaps been even crueler. Besides, we are told that after this happens, the parents aren't mad at Jesus, but instead praise God and worship Jesus as his child. In the next few chapters, Jesus is seen to perform several miracles. He heals a woodcutter's foot in chapter 10. In chapter 11, he carries water back from the well using only a cloak to hold the water. In chapter 12, he manages to sow more seeds in the time of sowing than his father Joseph. In chapter 13, he even assists Joseph in his carpentry work by miraculously stretching the wood into correct measurements, so Joseph can complete a project. So as we can see, Jesus becomes pretty helpful by the age of 8. He's unanimously using his powers for the greater good. This is the Jesus that most readers will be more familiar with, one who heals the sick and the unfortunate, who gives back to those who have helped him, and who realizes people's wants and intentions so long as they are good. But all that comes crashing down in chapter 14. You see, Joseph still wanted Jesus to learn the alphabet and to be acquainted with letters. Somehow, despite all his knowledge and powers, Jesus either couldn't learn the alphabet or just didn't want to. I mean, to him it's probably pretty useless knowledge, but out of respect for Joseph, Jesus does agree to be schooled by a second teacher. Just like with the previous teacher, Jesus and the second teacher don't see eye to eye and end up arguing over their respective understanding. When the teacher gets irritated with Jesus, he makes the grave error of slapping Jesus. To this, Jesus turns the other cheek, and then turns it back around, cursing the teacher and killing him on the spot. This incident scares Joseph and Mary so much that they actually ground Jesus and prevent him from leaving the house, for fear that he'll end up killing more people. In chapter 15, another teacher, who you must say probably had a death wish, comes to the house and offers to teach Jesus, saying confidently that he can teach him the letters. Somehow he's able to convince Joseph that this time it's going to work, and so the teacher leads Jesus by the hand away to his school. Interestingly, on this occasion, we are told that Jesus went gladly. So I suppose you might say that this teacher manages to make an impression on him. Third time's the charm, I guess. Upon entering the school, Jesus basically utters words so impressive that everyone around him is in awe of him. To this, the teacher doesn't try and teach him his own way of learning, but instead encourages Jesus to just speak his mind. And from his mouth, we are told, poured out holy words that were so pleasing and full of wisdom that crowds had gathered around the school to hear them too. Now, hearing this commotion, Joseph assumed the worst and rushed over to the school expecting to find the body of another dead teacher. But to his surprise, he found the teacher alive and well, who was praising Jesus for being so full of grace and wisdom. After this, the teacher tells Joseph to take Jesus back home, giving us the impression that his schooling was over and Jesus had somehow graduated. It isn't clear from the text whether Jesus ended up learning the letters as his father wanted, but it seems more likely the case that the teacher realized Jesus couldn't be taught anything, and to try to attempt to was foolish, because he was wiser than everyone who ever lived. This may be the case, for at the end of the chapter, Jesus praises the teacher, saying unto him, "Since you spoke correctly and testified correctly, the one struck down will be saved because of you." Immediately after saying this, the teacher who had perished at the word of Jesus was also saved and seemingly restored. Chapters 16, 17, and 18 see Jesus performing more miracles. He heals the snake bite of James before destroying the snake, perhaps a nod to his father in the Old Testament, where snakes are cursed to be stomped by a man's heel. He heals a dead newborn by simply willing it back to life, and he saves a builder from certain death by again telling him to get up and resume his work, which has the effect of restoring him back to full health. Now, when the crowds witness these miracles, they begin to think of Jesus as either an angel or a god. For how could anyone's words become deeds in such a manner? Soon they begin to worship him as his reputation grows, declaring that he must have come from heaven. By the final chapter, where Jesus is 12 years old, Mary and Joseph go to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. But during their return, Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem without his parents knowing. The text tells us that they had assumed he was in the travelling company, but when they realised he wasn't, they returned to Jerusalem and began to search for him. After 3 days of searching, they found him in the temple, sitting in the middle of various teachers, listening to them and questioning them, but thankfully not executing any of them. We are told that those who heard him were surprised with how he spoke, and couldn't get over how one as young as him was able to debate men far older than him. Mary and Joseph, though, having seen this their whole life, are far less impressed, and considering they were worried sick as to where he could have been, they were furious to see him so casually conversing in the temple. Mary said to him, "Child, what have you done to us? Look, we've been searching for you in pain and grieving." Of course, Jesus doesn't really care. He answers as if neither of his parents should have been concerned at all. Besides, he was here in the temple, in the place of his father. How could he have been in any safer place? Now, when the scribes and the Pharisees realize Mary is Jesus' mother, they all but fall over in front of her, saying to her, "Blessed are you that the Lord God has blessed the fruit of your womb, because we've never seen such wisdom of praise and glory of virtue." Now, it's unclear how Mary takes this. I mean, surely she already knows how Jesus was conceived and would have already heard the voice of God. But it may have been the first time that someone else acknowledged this fact. So it's possible she may have been taken back by their words, and may have even found them pleasing to hear. If anything, it's possible that these words placated her, because after this, we don't see her continue to reprimand Jesus for having effectively run away, but rather leads him away silently as they head back home. Here the text tells us that after this day, Jesus was obedient to his parents, and that Mary treasured him and all things, pondering them in her heart. The text concludes, "And Jesus advanced in wisdom and maturity and grace before God and humans." In conclusion, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas presents a deeply provocative image of the young Jesus, one that startles modern readers with its accounts of divine tantrums, sudden deaths, and miraculous restorations. These stories of the child Jesus striking down those who offend or challenge him may be symbolic of a being both divine and yet still learning to navigate the emotional impulses of human experience. Much like a real child who hasn't mastered the consequences of anger or frustration, this portrayal offers a raw and unfiltered look at the tension between power and maturity. Yet crucially, Jesus also brings the dead back to life, restoring what he had destroyed and demonstrating a fundamental goodness that underlies his actions. These acts of mercy not only temper the fear his power inspires, but also foreshadows the compassionate healer of the canonical Gospels. In the New Testament, the adult Jesus never kills, he saves, he forgives, he dies for others. This contrast may suggest a growth in restraint and wisdom, as if even the Son of God had to undergo a process of moral development. Perhaps the extremity of his childhood miracles was necessary, not out of cruelty, but to establish his identity in a skeptical world. Ultimately, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas may be less about theological accuracy and more about exploring what it means for the divine to wear the skin of a child, unpredictable, emotive, and still evolving. Therefore, you might say that this arc, from a wrathful wonder worker to a merciful Messiah, mirrors a journey not just of power, but ultimately of learning. Not just of us learning of Christ, but of him learning of us. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss my next upload. Until next time.